Welcome to the Consultancy Edge. I'm your host, Matt Hodkinson. Now, if you're still relying on referrals and wrestling with cold outreach, you're going to love this one. Mikey Hanson is the founder of Growth Genie, a sales training and enablement consultancy helping B2B teams move beyond spammy cadences to strategic conversations that really convert. In this episode, we dig into polite persistence, sales playbooks built from customer stories, and his cosmic framework, all designed to help you start better conversations and sell without ego. Let's dive right in. Welcome to the Consultancy Edge. Mikey Hanson, how are you today?
I'm great, man. I'm glad we're here having this chat.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. Listen, I know that you've got your own journey in the world of consultancy. You've been
Yeah.
helping a number of businesses over the years with their sales process, getting them set up with everything from better prospecting, training them on how to close better and build sales teams. Tell us first off, let's start there with your journey. Just tell the people out there where you've come from and where you've arriven at with Growth Genie.
Yeah, sure. So I think you and I met when I was at my old company at Inbound HubSpot's conference, which was 2018 or something like that. So yeah, my old company, my title eventually was VP of Growth, which is really a fancy way of saying head of sales and marketing. And we ran a like outsourced sales shop. So instead of hiring an SDR to call in house, we had a big team actually in Colombia and Medellin of about 200 people by the time I left who were doing business development, mainly for software and tech companies. And I was doing a lot of sales myself, managing a sales team. So I would built a big network of like sales leaders, chief revenue officers, chief marketing officers, as well as some CEOs of smaller companies. And the problem I kept hearing over and over again was like, I don't know how my team are doing business development because I get so much spam. I get like 300 emails a week, most of which are garbage. Same on LinkedIn. So I didn't like how to stand out from the noise. So that's really what we do at Growth Genie is we're trying to switch people away from like the transactional salesperson, which I think, as you will know from your inbox, Matt, is 99% of sales messages to being like very strategic. And there's two ways in which we do that. One is through like playbooks and processes and sequences, and then the other is through training and coaching. And yeah, our main clients are software and tech companies, but we've built a bit of a niche actually in the last few years also in like corporate real estate because theirs is very like relationship based sale as well. Oh.
Wonderful. I know that a lot of our consultancy leaders out there who will be listening, they haven't really struggled too much when they're in the conversation with great fit prospects. They're enthusiastic about what they do, they're subject matter experts, but it's often getting into the conversation. Mikey, what sort of tactics are you seeing that are working? I know there's always this the conundrum about whether to do anything cold, whether inbound enough is alone, but you need some outreach to go with that, which channels to use. I know that's a kind of broad base to start from, but if people are looking to really connect with great fit prospects to open the conversation, what are you seeing that's working right now?
I think one of the outbound and business development, especially with people like in the consultancy space, we talked about this earlier, often like you're reliant on referrals and all that stuff, is it can be intimidating because it's like, oh, I've got to like cold call these random people. But I think one of the things I recommend is firstly actually looking, is there any like warm outbound you could do? So that could be say you've got like enterprise clients, often you're maybe working with them in like one geography or one department. So trying to like upsell and get a customer story from that particular client and then share it with someone else in the company. The other part would be like people that have changed jobs who are former customers as well. Those are like very easy conversations to have. And then the other thing is like, and this goes into marketing as well, like how most outbound goes wrong is like salespeople are like, hey, do you have 15 minutes to meet? And if you're asking a stranger for 15 minutes to eat, they're going to say, even sometimes your colleague is not going to give you 15 minutes because they're working on something, let alone someone you don't know. So our approach is always like, what can you give before you take? Because obviously salespeople are trying to take money, but they're just trying to take time, like I was saying. So how can you flip that on its head and give? And in that situation, marketing content is a great thing. So instead of if you can create really good marketing content, that helps with outbound. I think a lot of people don't think about that.
Mm.
So like I could contact you and say, hey Matt, I see you've got this great consultancy edge podcast. I imagine you're trying to like grow the downloads on it. I've got a blog article with like 5 really tactical things to grow the downloads. Would you be interested in seeing it? Right. And you're like, yeah, sure. You send it, and then I've started a conversation, and then maybe then I can give you a call and it's like a little bit warmer. So that's something we recommend is like use marketing content, not just to get inbound leads, but also to like generate meetings for yourself as well.
I think that's great advice. We are, I think, as a society, and I see it all the time, especially with the messages I receive in my inbox every day and my DMs, that want to jump to the call.
Yeah.
And I know that one of the phrases I've heard over and over is this one of micro commitments and asking people to do something small first. I guess that's what you're talking about, right? Giving people something of value or a small thing to do that just engages them and gets you in the dialogue, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is like the bit I missed, which is the first thing we call it an observation, is like do a bit of research. It can just be one thing on the company. And I get a lot of pushback from people that work in sales saying, oh, it takes too much time to research every single customer. And I give them 2 bits of pushback to them, which is now with between AI, Google, social media, like you can find this in, we say maximum 5 minutes. We can find this in like under 2 minutes, right? And you only need one thing to refer to. Like I said, if I cold called you or send you an email, hey Matt, so you got the Consultancy Edge podcast, like how's it going? And suddenly it's a warm call. It's not like a cold call, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the other thing I always say is like, why should someone spend 15 to 30 minutes with you if you can't spend 5 minutes like researching them? So I think that's a big thing where most of the emails you receive in your inbox to anyone reading this are just part of a list. So if you can show that you've just not put them through some automated sequence, then they're going to be very happy. You're going to instantly be in like the top 1% of messages that they get. So,
That's an essential part, I feel, is that initial feeling of this message hasn't been broadcast to thousands. And you calling out things like the podcast, for example, I can't argue with the fact that that's for me. Because you've put something there that can only be applicable to me, and I love that idea. We talked about other sort of aspects of getting those triggers, I guess, as we call them in
yeah.
sales, Mikey, which is things like I've been using smart links, for example, a good while on Sales Navigator.
Yeah.
Anybody who engages with a PDF or clicks on a URL link, you get notified of that. Things like an office move or a new hire in the business,
Yeah.
those kinds of things can be a reason to reach out, right? But I wonder what the cadence looks like beyond there. And I think I'm right in saying you've got a 30-day cadence of, or a 30 touch point cadence
Yeah.
that actually goes over 3 weeks. So that seems really intense. Talk us through
Yeah.
that.
It's funny because it's almost a bit like yin and yang because some people are like, this guy's talking about personalization and research, and then he's also got these long cadences. But actually, what we say, we call it like polite persistence. And essentially, it's like if you've done your research, you're not actually spamming someone. You've like shown you're thoughtful. And often what will happen is a person will eventually respond and they'll be like, sorry, I've been super busy. Yeah, let's have a conversation. And I think the reason research and persistence together is important is because people get so many messages these days. I actually, even sometimes with warm deals, I had a conversation at a sales meeting in London on Tuesday. Former client, very happy with us, gave us a good case study. She's moved company. It's taken me 3 months to book a meeting with her. She's very interested. And she was literally like, harass me because I'm so busy. Like, I'm sorry I don't get back to you, but I've got so many things going on. And she's like targeted, I think it's like growing the business from like 30 to 60 million revenue in like the next 3 years. So she's got like a lot of things on her plate. And anyway, I think a lot of people are like, oh, if the person doesn't respond, like it means they're not interested. No, often they're just busy. Sometimes they're on holiday as well. I'm working a deal at the moment where the woman was like, let's start 1st of August. And then she's literally like ghosted me.
Yeah.
And then I must have sent her like 10 messages and she said, oh, I'm really sorry, I forgot to tell you I was on holiday. Obviously, I was like panicking, right? So, but it's good. At least I know where I stand now. Um, so anyway, in terms of a cadence, how it would look is if you send, I think sales is always a balance of quality and quantity. We talked about the quality piece already.
Yeah.
The quantity piece, how you can get the quantity up as well. If you send a really personalized message, you just send one bump. Our favorite thing is like any feedback here, Matt. So I use that as a template. Every time I send a personalized message, I just say that. And the goal of that is not that message in itself is nothing, but it's just drawing attention to the other message, right?
Mm.
And then let's imagine they don't respond to that. So I'm like, okay, I've done the bump. Maybe this hasn't resonated with them. I'm going to try a different type of pain point, right? So if maybe the first thing I was talking about your podcast growth, maybe then I'll be like, okay, I'm going to go for a different angle. I'm going to talk about, your work with consultancies. What's a big problem that people in consultancies are facing, or people that are trying to sell to some consultancies? I could do some research on that. I could go on ChatGPT. I could go on your LinkedIn, see if you've got any type of content. So it's always just trying to find a different angle. And then in terms of channels, we've got like calling, we've got LinkedIn, we've got emails, and then things like voice notes on LinkedIn. That works very well. It's something's like a little bit unique. So we just did and I can send you information on this, Matt, so you can put it in. But we just did a competition, which is like to send 50 voice notes in one day. And the top person who won, I think they got like 8 qualified opportunities from it. So it's like a 20%, nearly 20% conversion rate. And they're now like, the top SDR on the team. So just trying to be more human, anything that makes you more human and stand out, because I think in a world of AI, the more human you can be, the more you can separate yourself from AI. And as you know, Matt, you get a million messages on LinkedIn. Half of them nowadays are like, was this sent by a human or was it sent by a bot?
Yeah, and it's about providing those pattern interrupts, isn't it? And that's why the voice notes work really well. It's zagging when everybody else is zigging.
Exactly, yeah.
I did want to tap into that. I felt like there was a discussion pending there about mindset as well with sales, because I feel like
Yeah,
there's a couple of things going on, which I'd love your thoughts on. One is that people default to net new. They're always trying to chase people who aren't
yeah,
already in their world and try to get them into the conversation. The other is that sort of reticence to reach out because, maybe there's a fear of rejection, a fear that they're not providing value in what they're sending. I guess on that, my point was, if you don't reach out, it's a definite no. So you may as well,
yes,
if you
yeah.
feel like you're being a bit too persistent, to use your terminology, then that's the thing. So how much does mindset play into this, Mikey?
Oh yeah, 100%. And yeah, I wrote a LinkedIn post. It's probably like years ago now, 3 years ago or something, just saying exactly what you said, which is like the only thing that's worse than a rubbish sales message is doing nothing at
Yeah.
all, right? Because even though we're fighting against the culture of spam in sales, I know that you can learn from that. You can learn, like, if I look at, even when I was at CloudTask and we met, if I look at my messaging from like 2018, I would look at it now and be like, God, that's awful. So you're constantly learning just by doing. Um, and then yeah, mindset is absolutely critical. And I think there was two things I would say. So going to the marketing thing, because sometimes going back to what I said earlier around like try and offer a piece of content to get the conversation going and saying, hey, would you like to see this content? They say yes, you can send it. Often a salesperson will be like, oh, but like that content doesn't help me. So it's like it's too much of a long game.
Yeah.
I say you have to provide the mindset that you have to have with your prospect is I'm going to be helpful to this person even if they don't buy from me, right? And often that's like a long-term mindset that someone actually does business with you in the future. There was some of the people at CloudTask who I was selling to who didn't want to outsource sales. I became friends with them, and they ended up two people in specific. Like when I started my business, they became two of the first training customers at Growth Genie because I built a very good relationship just with the way I was selling to them, right? And that just goes just like being helpful in sales. And then I think the other part I would say is like detachment from like the outcome. So if you take cold calling as an example, I in training I ask a question like, "What's the goal of a cold call?" And most salespeople put their hands up and say, "Book a meeting." I say, "Okay, what's the step before that?" And it's to learn something new. Because actually, if you book a meeting with someone that's unqualified, it's a waste of time. If you book a meeting with someone and you learn absolutely nothing on the call, you're not prepared for the call. So we say, like, if let's imagine I'm calling a consultancy in your case, and I speak to a managing partner and they tell me 3 or 4 things about the consultancy, that's great because one, maybe if I follow up with them 2 or 3 months later, I've got that information, or two, maybe I can call someone else in the company. Hey, I spoke to your managing partner, Tim. He told me X, Y, and Z. What are your thoughts on that? So I think the overall theme here is like having more of a long-term mindset than a short-term mindset. Because if you're in B2B, normally your sales cycle are at least going to be months, probably years, and you've really got to have that like strategic mindset.
Mikey, we're we're often sort of told that I think for the last few years, ABM has been on everybody's radar, like it's some sort of new thing that hasn't been around since the day dot. But I wonder how much you advocate not just putting all your eggs in one basket when it comes to connecting with an organization. I think some people have a single connection. They might reach out on LinkedIn, start a conversation, and not think about who else has influence within that organization, building that sort of account map, if you like, and
Yeah.
an account penetration when it comes to the relationships. How much do you advocate that? How much does that feature into your approach?
Yeah, 100%. And there's actually two sides of that, which is one. So I think you've got persona research and account research. And the good thing is about account research is that stuff that you can use across different personas, right?
Yeah.
And then with personas, yeah, the way I would speak to you would be very different to, someone in your team who's like doing day-to-day operations. Um, so yeah, definitely we look at like account-based marketing, and that's the thing is always, we recommend with teams, especially we talked earlier about we train a lot of senior salespeople now who may only have 4 or 5 hours a week to do business development, right? Or, founder-led sales. And then it's like, okay, you don't have much time, so you've got to be very strategic. So rather than picking 400 leads, pick 10 companies that you really want to go after. You've got really strong reasons to go after and really know those companies well, like do your research on them. We think that's a much better approach. And I'm going to send the same message to 400 people.
Yeah, I love that. You've also talked about playbooks. I know you mentioned it earlier, and I think a lot of our listeners would have perhaps come across sales playbooks before now. I think you've built them from, if I'm right, customer stories and almost sort of reverse engineered your playbooks that way. Tell us about
Yeah.
that and how that works.
Yeah, 100%. So we say, like, for example, if someone says, "Hey, what do you do on a discovery call or a cold call?" We think the best way to explain it is through a story. And obviously you can customize the story. Hey, this is a fintech or this is a persona. So and then what we do with our playbooks is, yeah, often we say to the customers, what are the best case studies that you have? We would interview those customers from those case studies, and then we're asking them what are their pain points, even why wouldn't they have bought? Like, what were some of the objections they had, and like, why were they wrong about those? And then, yeah, you've got things around like the questions that you would be asking. And then we're also looking at sequence stuff, which goes into the playbook, like the emails, the call tracks, etc. So it's kind of like an end-to-end guide for a salesperson from like opening to close. The only caveat I would say here is like we call it a structure because the worst thing a salesperson can be is robotic. So we always say like take this playbook and make it your own, right? So it's normally more of a structure. So we actually recommend within the playbooks that we make, we say to like sellers like almost have your own mini playbook that's a remix of the playbook we're going to give you.
You also talked about how to sell without ego. I know that I think you've done a few podcasts on that topic. Do you think that sometimes, and I know this can be the case with founder-led sales, of course, most leaders in business have some element of ego about them. I hope that's not a sweeping generalization. You talk about 8 emotional triggers from
Yeah.
desire to fear and pride. How can CEOs model and coach that ego-aware selling in their own organizations?
Yeah, I've been down a big rabbit hole in the last 3, 4 years with like psychology. I feel like I've studied a psychology degree just by like getting better at sales because I realized a lot of the time when I was having bad quarters, especially in my old company, it was me. It wasn't like anything to do with the customer or marketing or anything like that. And I started getting into a lot of psychology. So Carl Jung is someone I study a lot. And anyway, I think with this piece, so there's one thing out of all those 8 emotions, and one thing that salespeople struggle with a lot is desire. Now, desire is interesting and ego is interesting because ego can be a good thing. Like you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning if you didn't have an ego. You wouldn't have a name. You wouldn't have all these things, right? And ego can be a good thing because you get a lot of former athletes that become very good salespeople, and it's because they're used to competition. They want to be the best. If there's a team of 50, they want to be number one, right? Or at least like in the top 10. But then when that desire is stronger than the curiosity about the customer, what happens is you get the sleazy salesperson. You get the salesperson that's only interested in their commission. You get the salesperson that just wants to get the next meeting. You get the salesperson that doesn't have the long-term mindset. So that's what we train them on is like desire is good, but your desire cannot be stronger than your curiosity about your customer. Like helping your customer has to be number one. And weirdly enough, your desire to hit your commission, if you focus on that, you're naturally going to get, the money and the commission anyway. So that's like one of the biggest ones that we work on with salespeople.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. It's that curiosity angle. We're told that the best salespeople are just great listeners. And whilst we've been talking about research and outreach and triggers and everything else, that quest for curiosity is the real difference maker sometimes, isn't it, between your best and worst, performing
Yeah.
salespeople?
Yeah, I think there's a stereotype of like this extrovert salesperson that talks a lot, etc. And I personally think it's rubbish, right? Like a lot of the best, so of course, good salespeople need to pitch, they need to be able to tell stories, but a lot of the stuff is just listening to the customers and like working out what they want. Especially once I know we talked a lot about SDRing today, but especially with closing, like SDRing, you can say your talk track and book your meetings, but once you're in a deal, especially like a big enterprise deal, most of that is like listening and balancing all these different stakeholders that you're speaking to.
But talking about the close, something occurs to me because I've heard different opinions on whether you should ask for the business. I think there's so many gurus out there who say always ask for the business. There are others who say
Yeah.
stay silent, answer all the questions, and there's implied pressure on the prospect then to ask you, and to give you those sales triggers and signals. But what's your thinking on that? Should you ask for the business? Does it depend? How do you approach that?
I think, yeah, but it's all about how you ask, right? So a bit, so say one of the questions we ask, which is good. Say you're sharing like a tech, well, tech maybe not that relevant for your consultancy clients, but say you do some type of pitch and then like, how would you see this working in your business, if at all, right? So that how would you see this working is trying to get them to imagine, because I think a lot of sales is like getting the person, the prospect, to imagine using your service.
It's
And
future
often
pacing, right?
exactly, whereas a bad salesperson, they won't the customer doesn't even really understand like what he's talking about, so they can't visualize what's happening. So how would you imagine using this? And then the if at all is the reason there's the stereotype of the sleazy salesperson is that thing of like they're trying to pressure me. They're trying to pressure me into a decision. So again, going to it, I talked about psychology of the seller, but psychology of the buyer. The buyer is 100% in control of their decision, right? The salesperson cannot like we can influence the buyer, but we cannot control the buyer, right? So you have to accept that. So that's why there's that if at all, like it's basically saying like, how would you imagine using this? And if you can't imagine using it, like tell me, that's fine. They say yes or no, right? And then you can go from there. There's also just kind of like non-aggressive questions. Another one I like is like how relevant do you think this is? So it's almost like I think throughout you're constantly trying to assess on a call, like how interested are they, right?
Mm.
And the more interested they are, then the more you can. And a lot of the time, like a big line that I use is like, here's what I'd suggest. And I feel like that's a good line of being confident but not pushy. Here's what I'd suggest. This is a timeline. You discuss it with your head of marketing or whatever it is, and then we have a conversation next week. How does that sound to you? And they can then say yes or no. So I think, yeah, a lot of it is yes, you need to gauge the interest. Yes, you need to see if they're interested, but language is a lot of, what's going to make or break it here.
Yeah, I love that. I do want to touch on the kinds of. Well, I guess what I want to say is that a lot of our listeners won't have the time or perceive that they won't have the time to do sales. As important as it is,
Mm,
we've always got that classic of when we're successful, we've got to land ourselves in delivery and really focus on that. When we deliver, we neglect the pipeline, and there's that whole balance
sure.
going on. And so people will be looking inevitably at either resource or tools that can help them to do that outreach, connect with more prospects. And the thing right now, as we all know, Mikey, is these AI agents and AI bots that are seemingly, or we're being told at least, that they're getting better and better and better and outperforming human beings when it comes to getting appointments on the diary. Give us the skinny. What's happening in that space? Are you seeing all of those claims actually come to fruition? Are we getting smoke
Uh,
blown up us? What's happening?
Yeah, I think it's smoke and mirrors. I think the thing AI does very well is research, going to the point. So the account research I talked about earlier, AI can do that much easier than you can, right? So that's a really good prompt. If you go on ChatGPT, Gemini, any of those things, tell me what's happened at this company recently. Bang, it gives you information. You can either use if it's outbound you're doing, or even if you've got like an inbound lead that you're going to be talking to. Where I don't think AI is good if you're like, I'm trying to sell to Matt Hodkinson, write me a letter, write me an email selling sales training. It's just going to write a load of rubbish, right? And then even I can be very open here. There was someone I really respect who's got like an email technology, and he released an AI SDR. Now, all the other AI SDRs, I'm sure I was like, this is a load of rubbish. I knew some of the customers they were training, but because I quite respected this guy, I was like, okay, I'll test it out. I won't say who it is. Did it for 3 months. We put loads of prompts in. It had our customer stories, it had our pain points, and the emails were good. It didn't damage our brand. I looked at the emails and looked good, but you could just tell that it was AI somehow. And we got like a few responses, as I said, because they weren't bad emails. It was like, hey, this is interesting, but it's it's not relevant for us right now. So I really think it's that like human touch that gets business, because at the end of the day, a salesperson, and I always say this in training, is right at the bottom of the priority list for like these people. Their staff and their customers are number one, and then they've got accountants and investors and all these other things, right? So you're right at the bottom. So I really think it takes that human touch to like be like a good business development person that's going to be able to book a meeting with someone.
We had John Barrows on the podcast recently. He came to the same conclusion when it came to AIs. If he received those messages and he was able to tell, as most of us I think are, that it's an AI generated message, then we just value it much less, and it doesn't get
Yeah.
the response. And talking about that human connection, Mikey, I want to talk about your cosmic sales framework, because
Yeah.
that's where you are seeking emotional connection over metrics, right? Tell us, is there one core element of cosmic that can transform your client's sales? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's so cosmic is like a classic framework. So every letter stands for something. But I think two things that are most unique is the spiritual and material, which is the S and the M. So spiritual is a word that can freak some people out, but in that case we say emotional, right? And what we say is, I think especially in the world of B2B, we often think of like people in suits and they're corporate, and like we never think of their life like outside of work, but they're all unique individuals. They're humans. We have I can tell you decks because they're on our website and they sell to accountants, and even accountants, they've got like personalities and lives, right? Um, so we're saying, okay, what's the human aspect here? And an example I always give, which that you'll relate to from a marketing perspective, is like when I'm speaking to a chief marketing officer, I'm like, how does it make your team feel when they create all this content and case studies and the sales team doesn't use it? And it's like, oh yeah, it makes them feel terrible, right? So that's more of like what we call a spiritual challenge. So that's one of the big things we're like delving into. And then from the storytelling perspective, it's always about have humans in your stories with like unique emotions. Don't just say, hey, we worked with Deloitte. Say, okay, who was the individual within Deloitte you worked with? What were they suffering with beforehand? How have you helped them? So I'd say that's like the biggest thing that's a little bit different for us in our cosmic framework.
And that would be an alternative to the likes of Medic and Band, people might have been aware of. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. There's another thing, there's a lot of crossover between these frameworks. So like I is influence, which is the different decision makers, and Medic is very good at that. The two C's are challenge and consequence. Again, Medic and fan, I'm not a big fan of Medic is okay. But the other one is O, which is open, and that's actually like asking the salesperson, like, why would this deal not close? Because most salespeople I know from training and also all the VPs that I work with say they've got happy ears, right? They always think the deal is going to close and it's not going to close, right? It's like every salesperson has a pipeline, but very few actually forecast well. So it's actually getting them in the mindset of the reason this deal wouldn't close is because of X. And that's actually good because they can take action. So if you imagine the term multi-threading, which is reaching out to different stakeholders. So I've single-threaded, I've got this deal, and I'm speaking to the VP of sales, but I've not spoken to the CRO. So if I identify that, I can be like, okay, what action can I take now with the CRO? Should I talk to the VP of sales about it? Should I reach out to them directly? So actually that O piece, it helps you identify like what are the things that are going to stop the deal from closing. Oh.
That's clever. I like that a lot. Um, you also recommend, I know that we're having pummeled into us the need to create content all the time, Mikey.
Hmm.
And I mean, I would say to that, of course, make sure the messaging is right before you do that, so it's
Yeah.
optimal when it gets out there. But you also recommend integrating marketing and sales content. So essentially
Oh.
turning content consumers into prospects. So
Yeah.
what's a content piece that you've created recently or not so recently that became a powerful sales trigger for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are actually getting annoyed with this tactic now. You see a lot, a lot of people complaining about it because the LinkedIn algorithm is, I think like all these social media platforms are trying to get you to pay to play more, right? So the, organic reach is down. So one of the things you can do is like, hey, here's a piece of content, comment if you would like to see it.
Mm.
Our sales playbook, one of the things we did, our head of content who creates our sales playbooks, he's actually a former lawyer, right? So when I put out our sales playbook on LinkedIn, he was like, "This is crazy. This is our IP, etc." But you can do the carousels. So I did a carousel. It was like 150 slides, our playbook, and just like, "Hey, here's our playbook. This is a problem with most playbooks. Comment if you'd like to see it." You've got, I don't know, 600 comments. Maybe only 25% of those were qualified.
Yeah.
But then sent them the playbook, and then you could say, "Hey, how are you currently building your playbook?" So we got some, leads and customers from that. So yeah, the playbook has been a really good thing, and I think a lot of a big bit of advice I would have with these, like anyone listening to this, is don't be scared to like give away your secret sauce, because a lot of the time I speak to people and they say, "Oh yeah, but if I give them this piece of content, they're just going to know everything that I do and going to be able to do it themselves." I'm like, the implementation is the difficult piece, right? I can give you all the sales tactics in the world, but if you don't know how to train people on these sales tactics, like all the things we talked about, mindset, and there's so many other nuances, then you're not going to be able to do it. So yeah, being open source with that playbook. Maybe there are a couple of competitors that saw it and got some ideas, but we got loads of business and leads from it. So,
But also, if you are able to give away the theory and somebody can then go and use that to implement it themselves, you've just invalidated your entire business model, right?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of that, of letting your IP get out there, because I think the other thing that it generates from people, yes, there's obviously you're giving them part of the solution and they still need the implementation. But the other thing I've noticed, Mikey, is that there's a feeling of indebtedness as well to the provider.
Yes, yeah.
And that can last for a significant amount of time. I was reading an email from a friend of mine recently, and he said that there's a guy who received something that was basically his entire playbook and ended up buying from him several years later because he never forgot that just the
Yeah.
level of information and help that he gave was there for all to see.
Yeah, I've got a story like that actually, which is we don't work with like founder-led sales teams. So normally a team needs to have at least a couple of salespeople. And I had a conversation with a guy that I got referred to. I didn't know at the time that he didn't have salespeople. He told me where he was at, and I said, "Hey, how are you doing outbound?" He said, "I'm doing it all myself." And I said, "Hey, why don't you share screen and I'll give you some advice." We end up being on the call for about an hour. He called me a year later. He was like, "I've used your tactics. I've like closed loads of deals, generated loads of meetings. I've just hired like 3 salespeople. Will you train them?" Right. So it just goes to show like just being helpful and playing a long game. Oh.
Yeah. We've just talked about, of course, the LinkedIn algorithm, everything going pay to play. Buyers are increasingly overloaded, 100 plus daily emails, voice fatigue. What's your boldest prediction for which channel or technique is going to dominate outbound in the next 2 to 3 years? Is it still a multi-channel approach, or how do we make it manageable?
I would say it's going to be more and more multi-channel just because I think things are getting very fragmented. And even from a marketing perspective, this is what's difficult now is like you've got all these different social medias and newsletters and all this stuff. So um I think it's going to be a combination of stuff. I still think in person, if you can meet clients in person for closing and even to have that initial meeting is really valuable. Like I did obviously like during the pandemic it was very difficult to close business in person, right? But I did an analysis recently of like the last 15 deals that I closed. 12 of them had an in-person meeting, and we're a pretty international business, so some of these are in like Hungary and like 3 cities in the US, and it did require some traveling. But if you are able to hop on a train or a plane or whatever it is, I think in that world of AI, being able to look someone in the eye, it really stands out. And that's, you and I met in person. I think I last saw you at the Excel, right? I've seen you at Inbound, and I said yes straight away to doing the podcast. I used to say yes to every podcast, but nowadays, one in two, I won't say yes to, but instantly I was like, yeah, Matt, I'll always have time for him, right? Whereas some guy maybe that I met on Zoom, I may not even genuinely, there's probably 50 people that I've met on Zoom that I probably wouldn't even recognize if I saw them, right? So
Amazing. Well, I'm glad you slipped through the net when it came to our little podcast here, Mikey. Listen, I want to wrap up with our usual feature. You may or may not have seen this: Snog, Marry, Avoid. And it's
Okay.
not the one you're thinking of, because I know you got married this year,
Yeah,
so we won't stray into that territory. The Snog is a quick win in the world of business and sales.
yeah.
What is something that you would advocate that people implement as quickly as possible?
Yeah, set up a system. You can do this in LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Even if you don't, especially if you don't have a lot of customers, it should be quite easy to do. Track customers that have changed jobs, because if you have happy customers that have changed jobs, they are the easiest people to sell to, and then will have very short sales cycles as well.
Wonderful, because they want to make a big impact in their new role, don't they? Right?
Exactly, and they know you. They know your business. The weird thing is, you don't even have to pitch them.
Yeah.
Like they've got to pitch their company internally, but they're the best champion that you can have.
Great stuff. And marry is something that you absolutely couldn't live without in business. It's there for the long term.
Oh, interesting. Um, I would say, which is funny because I have a bit of a hate relationship at the moment, but I think LinkedIn is just so good for me, actually less than, I post every day and that gets us great leads, but just the research piece, just like being able to like find out information on your buyers on LinkedIn. Oh.
Yeah, it still baffles me why I get offers of database and lists and everything else when you've got LinkedIn right there, even the likes of Zoom Info and Apollo. And yet you've got people contacting you saying, do you want to buy a list of 14,000 dentists? And I'm like, no. Great research on their part, by the way. And lastly, and avoid, what do you think doesn't serve people in business and sales, Mikey, that they absolutely need to get rid of as soon as possible?
Yeah, don't ask strangers for 15 minutes because strangers are not going to give you 15 minutes. Like, give them something of value first. So,
Yeah, love that. Those micro commitments. Give a bit of homework first.
yeah.
Love it. Mikey, it's been amazing listening to you today. I think listeners will get an amazing amount of value. Where can they find you and find out more about what you do at Growth Genie?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you put in Michael Hanson, search Growth Genie in LinkedIn, I should come up. And then if you go on our website, growthgenie.co, it is .co. I couldn't get .com, unfortunately. You'll see like lots of information about our services there as well. So,
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being with us today, Mikey Hanson.
yeah, no, pleasure. Oh, just one last thing as well. I have a newsletter as well, so you can put a link to that, and people can. It's just a one email every week with some sales tips. So,
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
all right, cheers, Matt.